Good morning, and thank you all for coming. I'm New York State Attorney General Eric Schneiderman, and I'm here today with Attorney General Kathleen Kane of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to announce a groundbreaking multi-state law enforcement initiative to combat the spread of deadly heroin throughout the northeastern United States. Also joining me today are two activists with the group Drug Crisis in Our Backyard, Stephen Salamone and Arthur Posner, and Stephen will be speaking to us a little bit and sharing his personal story in a few minutes. We're forming this task force because every day we're confronted with a rising tide that challenges law enforcement agencies throughout America. Around the Northeast and across the country, our communities are plagued with a flood of cheap, powerful heroin that is placing our communities at risk and threatening lives. Today I'm proud to announce that Attorney General Kane and I will be co-chairing an unprecedented law enforcement partnership called the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic Heroin Task Force to break up dangerous drug gangs and pipelines that have been flooding the region with deadly opiates and operate across state lines. I'm also pleased to announce that Massachusetts Attorney General Martha Coakley and New Jersey's Acting Attorney General John Hoffman will also be joining our task force, and we expect to announce additional states in the Northeast in the coming weeks. We are pooling our resources and setting up formal lines for communication because this is a problem no single state can solve. I'll let Attorney General Kane address what she's seen in Pennsylvania, but here in New York, I'm very proud of our record of cracking down and breaking up drug gangs across the state. In fact, in the last 3.5 years, our office has made more than 400 felony drug arrests, busting up at least 20 of the largest drug rings, in some cases in the history of our state, from Brooklyn to Buffalo, Staten Island to Syracuse. We are working closely with our colleagues in local law enforcement to tackle this problem. But in virtually every bust we make, the drugs we seize, the drugs being sold, have crossed state lines. It has become completely clear that no state can tackle this alone. Dangerous drugs that come into the ports of New York and Philadelphia are finding their ways onto the streets all over the Northeast. They're finding their way to other cities in New York and Pennsylvania, and they're moving to other states as well. Just one example. In July, we broke up a major drug distribution network in western New York. 47 people were arrested, and it was funneling heroin from Philadelphia and New York City to Jamestown, New York, in western New York, where it was distributing it in other parts of the. They were distributing drugs in other parts of the state. We have had the sophisticated and increasingly sophisticated network of narcotics dealers across the Northeast, moving large quantities of heroin across state lines with increased effectiveness, and we can no longer allow state boundaries to serve as a barrier to effective law enforcement. The heroin by the numbers chart tells you the whole story. Over half of the law enforcement agencies in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic regions reported high heroin availability in their jurisdictions last year. In the last 2 years, over 98% of the large-scale heroin trafficking cases prosecuted by my office have involved heroin flowing between New York and either Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, or New Jersey. The increased sophistication and scope of the heroin distribution networks we're confronting mean that sharing information informally is no longer good enough. We can no longer allow defendants to use state lines as a shield from law enforcement. As you see here, there are a number of major highways in the Northeast, in the second chart, that provide quick access around the region and across state lines. And in order to fight these increasingly organized and far-flung operations, we need a regional coordinated approach, a formal framework for collaboration and for sharing information to investigate and prosecute more effectively. The task force we're announcing today will do just that. It will expand our exchange of information by creating a regular, routine, and ongoing dialogue, including the ability to pass names and aliases of specific suspects, phone numbers, addresses, access to informants, distribution routes, and locations of stash houses. For example, during the course of investigations, if we have a wiretap on in New York, we often identify heroin suppliers and their related networks who talk about operations in other states. This unprecedented task force will give us the framework to coordinate with law enforcement in those states so that they can pursue those suspects who might otherwise remain at large. We often identify informants who have information about heroin trafficking or other criminal activities in other states. This task force will enable us to create a fully confidential, secure channel to pass information about what informants reveal or what we pick up on wiretaps that could then enable our colleagues in other states to pursue these criminals and others that they know about and use the information that they pass on in a much more effective way. We really have not had the ability in a typical case to go beyond the individuals in other states who have a very direct connection to the drug crimes in New York. We don't get to those individuals and then start to look around at their network in the other state. Now we will be able to do that. We believe that cooperation and coordination of law enforcement agencies will lead to larger and stronger criminal cases against the leaders of large-scale narcotics operations that span multiple states. Many times the kingpins of these operations are not in our state, and while we can go after anyone who's committing a drug crime in New York, we've been limited in our ability to pursue major drug traffickers across state lines. That is going to be coming to an end with our task force. I'm very proud of the fact that we've been able to overcome whatever political or other barriers existed that make this the first multi-state task force of its kind in the history of the United States, as far as we can tell. We believe in working together. We believe in collaboration. Budgets are tight at the federal, state, and local level, and those of us in law enforcement have to work together to more effectively protect the people that we serve. I look forward to working with my colleagues, attorneys general, and to serving as conduits to local law enforcement in each of our states. And now it's a real pleasure to introduce someone who's been a terrific colleague and a real leader in getting this project moving and getting something unprecedented done that we believe will serve as a model for the rest of the country, Pennsylvania Attorney General Kathleen Kane.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good morning. My heartfelt thanks to Attorney General Schneiderman and everyone who's here today. On behalf of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, I'm very pleased to join the state of New York, Attorney General Schneiderman and his great team, and I'm greatly encouraged by his determination and his spirit of cooperation that brought us together today. I needed no convincing when Attorney General Schneiderman proposed the task force to pool our resources. I know firsthand that we face a strong, resolute, and common enemy. Heroin has always posed an ominous threat to the underpinnings of our society. But we now find this old enemy armed with new economic and distribution advantages that are spreading addictions like a potent cancer. Those who manufacture, traffic, and sell this deadly and addictive drug are as strong and violent at its source as they are nimble and well-financed where they sell it. Across the country, we are losing young people and old in every single community in every single state. To heroin addiction, to lives of crime, which often addicts turn to, and most tragically to overdoses and death of our children. It's no exaggeration to say that heroin is the greatest public health and safety threat to facing American society today. In Pennsylvania, we've seen children as young as 12 years old starting with heroin. These are children from all socio and economic backgrounds. It is no longer the days where you say, that will never be my child, or that is not my child, or that's got to be someone else's child. It's our children. The pattern is all too familiar. A person gets opioid painkillers, usually from their parents' medicine cabinets or from friends. An addiction follows at a frightening speed. And because opioids are expensive, sometimes 3 times the cost of heroin, they can no longer afford their prescription pills, and they turn to heroin. Drug dealers conveniently run out of prescription pills just when their new customers are most in need. So the dealers offer heroin at $3 to $10 a bag. Another person is now on the hook. They market their drugs. And this is not an isolated case. Pennsylvania has the 3rd highest number of heroin users in the United States, only behind California and Illinois. And we know that 9 out of 10 heroin users in Pennsylvania started with prescription pills. Heroin is everywhere, and it's cheap. A bag of heroin can be 1/10 the cost of a single opioid painkiller. And in some neighborhoods, it's cheaper and easier for children to get that heroin than it is for them to get a pack of cigarettes. We know where this problem begins. We've made direct links in Pennsylvania to 3 Mexican cartels responsible for trafficking heroin in Pennsylvania. These cartels traffic millions of dollars of marijuana, which is a financial lubricant for heroin, in and out of Pennsylvania every day. They fund heroin and meth operations with the money they make from selling the marijuana. And business is booming. Right now, the supply of heroin is greater than the demand. We've gathered intelligence that shows Philadelphia is becoming a source city for heroin geographically. That's because Philadelphia is the crossroads for the supply of heroin, and it comes into Philadelphia by land and sea, and then trafficked from Philadelphia up and down the East Coast and to the western states as well. This gives Pennsylvania law enforcement a very keen interest in any activity, any technology, and any partnership that will help us turn the tide of the heroin epidemic to our favor. And the formation of the Mid-Atlantic New England States Heroin Task Force is a major step in the right direction. Traffickers, as you heard from Attorney General Schneiderman, do not stop at state borders. This joint effort helps ensure that the intelligence that we gather to defeat them won't stop at the borders either. We will build operational relationships to address the threat. We will focus our attention where they can make the most progress. For example, yesterday I met with the New York City Police Commissioner Bill Bratton to build an operational relationship because New York City and Philadelphia are the largest hubs for heroin trafficking in the eastern United States. One of the goals of our partnership with the Office of Attorney General is to raise awareness and to educate the public and the parents about the crippling effect of this heroin epidemic. We have a far better chance of doing that as a single team than any one of us would have engaged in an individual effort. One of our first orders of business is to create a robust intelligence strategies to educate the stakeholders and the public about this heroin epidemic. It's very important to note that the energy to form this task force comes from painful realizations that too many people are becoming addicted every day. Too many families have lost loved ones to the scourge of heroin addiction, and too many neighborhoods across Pennsylvania and New York and the United States have been destroyed by heroin-related violence. Banding together is not a sign that any agency is too weak to fight this epidemic alone. It is a sign that our collective effort is the strongest way that we can serve the citizens that we work for and who need us the most. I'm very proud to be a part of this effort, and I look forward to working with my colleague, Attorney General Schneiderman, and our colleagues from the neighboring states on this extremely important and historic partnership. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Attorney General Kane. And I'd now like to introduce someone who really reflects the fact that we, in addition to law enforcement agencies, we have networks of activists who really are trying to get involved in public education, and also, in addition to trying to get people off drugs and into treatment, are providing support for creative efforts in law enforcement and public health. Stephen Salamone is going to get up and tell you a few things about his efforts. Stephen?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Attorney Kane and Schneiderman. I think this is an unprecedented and actually well-needed effort. I come to you as a parent. I'm not a professional. I don't have training. The only training I have is that I lost my son, Justin, at 29 years old. As a result of his death from his second heroin overdose, we teamed up with another couple, the Christiansons, Lou and Carol, who lost their son at the age of 30. And we formed a group called Drug Crisis in Our Backyard. And the reason we formed the group was because we experienced at the time of our son's death that there was a lack of awareness of how big this problem is. And there was a lot of denial on the part of the community about how close it was to home. And it is very close to home. So we formulated the group to drive that awareness and to help other families that were struggling find support, get resources, and also feel comforted that they could come forward and admit that they had a problem within their family. There was no shame in this. This is something that is a disease that needs to be addressed, and we were offering them a vehicle to do that. Awareness was what we drove for and strove for diligently and worked very hard at. And I'm encouraged today to see that elected officials and our government and our administration is starting to take some action. And I'm encouraged by it. I think it's a very important thing that we do as a country right now, as a state, as a country, as a community, because this epidemic is killing off our young children at an unprecedented rate. So I commend the action. It's unprecedented. I think we need to think outside the box in combating this problem, and I'm encouraged by it. I kind of feel that my son Justin's and Eric Christensen's Eric Christensen's memory are kept alive through actions such as this, because their deaths were what started us on the path to awareness, and now this awareness is leading to action, and I think that's very important. I think it's important to note that we choose action, and that we don't choose to sulk and find pity, but that we choose action, and as a state that we're choosing action, and I think that that's an important point. Parents, my final message is, if you have children, if you have young children in your home, please do not make the same mistake that we made in thinking that it is something that's not happening in your community or in your homes. It is. If you have young children that are in high school and middle school, they are being exposed to this. And don't look to the government to solve the problem. The government is one leg of the stool, but the family is the other. And we need our families to be diligent and talking to their children and realizing that they need to take responsibility as well for helping to turn this around. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. And thanks to Mr. Salomon and Mr. Posner and the others who are a part of this. It is very important to focus on this final point as we're talking about the heroin epidemic we face. This is no longer a drug that is limited to poor communities. This is no longer a drug that has barriers that are defined by class or race or ethnicity. This is in every community. This is in middle-class communities. This is in well-to-do communities. The stigma that existed decades ago, or even people who would experiment with drugs would stay away from heroin, for some reason appears to be gone. This is now regarded as a party drug by a lot of young people. And so the epidemic is much more dangerous, and the need for us to use our resources intelligently to coordinate and cooperate is greater than ever. And I'm pleased that for the first time in history, we're setting up an interstate coalition to do just that. And with that, I think we can take some questions.
Just introduce yourself if you could before you start.
Tom Hayes, the Associated Press. Are these same gangs trafficking in painkillers as well?
We find that in many cases, and there, as I said, we've busted up more than 20 major rings, and it varies. But we found that in most cases, in addition to heroin or cocaine, they also are carrying prescription drugs, because that's a part of their inventory at this point in time. And as Attorney General Kane noted, it is one of the major entry points for people to get addicted to opioids. And essentially, it's the same addiction. Prescription opioids, it's the same chemical reaction. In New York, we have made a major step through our iStop program of cracking down on overprescribing. You can't doctor shop in New York anymore, because my office set up an internet tracking system so all doctors and pharmacists can see if I have one oxycodone prescription or 5. Attorney General Kane is trying to pass similar legislation in Pennsylvania. We're talking to some other colleagues about that. So we're working to close down the entry point of prescription drug abuse. But you're absolutely correct that some of the gangs, many of the gangs, in most cases, they have prescription drugs as well as street drugs.
Can you give an example of how the multi-state collaboration would enhance an investigation?
Sure. So let's use an example. We've broken up a series of major rings, including the largest drug ring in the history of Western New York. If we have an informant who is trying to provide us an information in return for leniency or something like that, and they have information about another state, usually in law enforcement now, that doesn't do us any good. We don't have jurisdiction to go prosecute someone in another state. Or if we have a wiretap up and people are discussing crimes going on in another state, or they know other drug dealers in other states, there's no channel for that information to pass. So this task force we're going to set up formal, secure channels for passing the information along, and then each of us, I will serve as the sort of the conduit to local law enforcement agencies in New York, because while the NYPD, and I have to say the Commissioner is a very strong supporter of all of our work in this area, is a very sophisticated operation. In many smaller communities, the local law enforcement agencies are overwhelmed by things like this. So in New York, our Organized Crime Task Force, which Perry heads up, it serves as a vehicle for any multi-county investigation. But now in Pennsylvania and New York, we'll be able to pass on information and share information and pursue people more aggressively. There's information being gathered by law enforcement agencies all over the country about activities in other states. It's just not going anywhere, and we're going to put an end to that.
And if I can, in Pennsylvania, if you wanted an example, one of our largest prescription pill busts was with the cooperation of New York State, and it was largest in the history of Pennsylvania. So it does work. It gives real results. It's not just a task force where we talk about ideas and concepts. We put them to work in practical approaches that really do make arrests and really do make people safer.
Well, we have the task force itself is so far 4 states have signed on. We expect to sign on more, but the task force is just a vehicle for coordination between the folks in our criminal division, our organized crime task force, which is a substantial number of investigators and attorneys, and our counterparts in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Massachusetts, and we expect to expand to other states as well.
I'm sorry, one more breaking news question. I just have to ask this in Westchester. It's a little off topic.
Let's finish on topic. Yeah. This is, as I've said, this is a problem that now heroin abuse crosses every class and every community line. It's no longer something that's restricted to cities, and we have seen the problem, and folks in Nassau County were really among those in the lead on our organizing families and law enforcement and medical professionals, and we tried to put our iStop program into effect. And there have been a lot of deaths of young people in the suburbs from heroin. I think our latest statistics show that something like 450 deaths from overdoses in New York City as of the last year where we have data, and on Long Island something like 330 some odd deaths. So it's really a problem that has expanded beyond cities into suburban communities. And again, Stephen Salamon's words are very important. Parents, it's time to stop pretending that if you're in a middle-class community or you're in a well-to-do community, that your children are not being exposed to heroin. It is everywhere. It is getting to everyone's kids, and you have to be alert, and you have to be willing to acknowledge you have a problem, seek treatment, and try and help your children. Denial is a really deadly enemy in dealing with kids with heroin problems. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.